The second round of matchups for the PFL 2023 regular season have all been posted on the MMA Fight Archive, ready for you to be studying them and breaking them down as well. The MMA Fight Archive is the largest collection of direct fight links to past fights from fighters from some of the top organizations from all over the world. You see all the promotions listed around me on this graphic, the majority of them of which have events going down in June in a very busy schedule upcoming for the MMA world. So if you want direct links and to save a bunch of time in terms of trying to find all the tape and footage and past fights of these fighters, I got all that for you on the MMA Fight Archive, approaching over 1,400 fighter profiles currently on there. We're going to reach 1,500, probably even closer to 1,700 by the end of June, considering all the events that are about to go down. Make sure you guys take full advantage of it. Super cheap, $9.99 a month. It saves you a bunch of time, and I promise if you break down your own fights, do the predicting, and like to do all the research all yourself, the MMA Fight Archive is there for you. There's a reason we already have over 30 members within the first month of this damn thing launching. Appreciate everybody that's checked it out thus far. Appreciate everybody that's going to be signing up for it. And also, if you don't want to chip out the $9.99 right off the bat, there is a 7-day free trial for you to give it a spin without having to shell out any money yet. And if that, that should be what sells you on it, going through it for the first 7 days, then you can sign up for it afterwards. Take full advantage of that. Link in the description below. Check it out. Thank me later. All right, let's get right into the podcast. Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Maverick, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. This week, we're going over UFC 289, which is headlined by a women's bantamweight title fight between Amanda Nunes and Aldana. In the co-main event, we have a high-stakes, super high entertainment value fight in the lightweight division between Charles Do Bronx Oliveira and Dariush, and we got a ton of great Canadian talent sprinkled out throughout the card, since this fight is actually taking place in Vancouver, Canada. So shout out to the Great White North for finally getting an event since the whole COVID era. Still waiting for one on this side of the Canadian scene, the East Coast, hopefully for something in Toronto or in the Montreal area, but we'll take a Canadian event no matter where we can get it. I have that pay-per-view glow because there's always something about pay-per-view fight week that just makes everything a little bit special. But before we get into the breakdowns, I quickly want to go over the Lock of the Night predictions from last week, and it was pretty damn good. Both Lock of the Night plays hit for the UFC. We had Tim Elliott go out there and do the damn thing against Victor Altamirano. And then also for Cage Warriors, we had the under 1.5 in the Teddy Stringer fight. Very chalky, but I knew that was going to come through without a doubt. But we did fantastic in terms of predictions on that card, as well as the Dog of the Night prediction for that, James Settle, came through with relative ease as well. Dog of the Night for the UFC did not go so well, and Muin Gafurov just could not get off a solid enough effective striking to get the decision victory over John Castaneda, but showed off some decent things that shows that he could potentially be a very entertaining addition to the UFC's bantamweight division. In terms of overall predictions for the UFC, though, we kind of shit the bed in terms of my best predictions. Not probably the worst event I had in terms of just straight up predictions, but in terms of the spots that I actually shot on in terms of bets and all that, we ended up on the night, specifically with Tim Elliott being the majority of our stake that night. And that's the goal. Get the Lock of the Night predictions correct, cash in on that, and the rest of it should settle itself out. A reminder that there is PFL this week as well. They got 3 straight weeks of events here, and the only place you'll be able to get those PFL breakdowns are going to be on the Patreon. Link in the description below. I only do video predictions for the UFC Contender Series and Bellator. Contender Series, I believe, starts in August, and Bellator, very sporadic with their events. But in terms of just saving myself a little bit of time, being able to keep up to date with the Fight Archive, and being able to keep up to date with all the Patreon information and stuff that I put out there, I don't do any video breakdowns for PFL. So if you want breakdowns for breakdowns for those, link in the description below. I promise you will not be disappointed, as PFL has been pretty damn good to us throughout the first 3 events, including the 4th event, which is their PFL Euro Series, which I believe their 2nd event is coming up in July as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But again, make sure you check out the Patreon. All the breakdowns usually are on there first before the public gets a hold of them, and not to mention Lock of the Night prediction, Dog of the Night prediction, and a bunch of other fun parlays for you guys to check out. Appreciate all the support. You guys are the freaking awesome and best people for supporting your boy through there as well. Also, lastly, shout out to GodzillaWins, which is a platform that I release written content for on a weekly basis. On Wednesdays, we drop the main event written prediction down there. And then on Thursdays, we drop the 3 best Moneyline spots as well for every single UFC event. As soon as they're posted, I update the description below so that you guys can just click them there and head on over there and check it out. All right, that's a wrap on all the plugs. Let's get right into the breakdowns. Kicking things off in the women's strawweight division, we got 14-7 Diana Belbita going up against 13-6 Maria Oliveira. Starting off on the Diana Belbita side, she's coming off a loss to Gloria De Paula last time around, but she's been out of the cage for over 16 months at this point in time. She was scheduled to fight Loma Lukbunmi back in September, but was unfortunately forced to pull out of that contest due to an injury, and now here she returns in her home country, or at least adopted home country now, of Canada, specifically in Vancouver. She is originally a Romanian fighter who changed up her camp, moving down to Stony Creek, aka Hamilton, Ontario, to train out of the famed House of Champions gym under one of the top coaches that we have in the country in Crew Alin. Now, Diana Belbita comes from a striking background, and you can see that on full display when she goes out there and throws down. She has great aggression, forward movement, and straight shots down the pipe. She does a really good job in terms of working the body of her opponent and really putting the damage on them. She's improving the defensive grappling parts of her game, which seems to be the downfall of some of her losses that she's taken. She is currently 1-3 in her UFC career thus far, but I believe that she is becoming a better fighter and even showcased some good things in that loss to Gloria De Paula. If she can show a little bit more urgency in terms of working out of bad positions, specifically getting tied up against the cage, she should be able to start getting some victories under her belt and start picking up some momentum. On the flip side, her opponent Maria Oliveira is coming off of a loss to Vanessa Demopoulos back in November in a fight where she got dropped multiple times and actually gave up a lot of control time to Vanessa Demopoulos. Now, Oliveira is an aggressive striker in her own right, but she does a great job in terms of moving laterally, staying on the outside of her opponent's range, and then crashing the pocket with a couple big strikes when she needs to, just to get off some offense. That's how she was able to pull off the upset as nearly a 2-1 underdog to Gloria De Paula back in June of last year, but she needs to add a couple more wrinkles to her game if she hopes to make it to further levels inside the UFC. She's trained out of the PRVT gym, which is famed from Jessica Andrade, who's a big name from out of there, as well as Carol Hosa. So I'm curious to see if Spider Girl can go out there and continue adding to her skill set, especially considering that she's only 26 years old. This is sure to be a very close fight with women, or both women, having solid success in the striking realm, but I'm going to have to lean with the Canadian or Romanian Canadian here in Diana Belbita. I feel like her aggressive striking style will be able to land more effective strikes on Oliveira, which could even translate to some knockdowns here, just as she's been able to do in the past, and just as Maria Oliveira was on the receiving end in the last fight against Vanessa Demopoulos. Now she's going up against a better striker who should be able to cut off the cage, land better strikes whenever Oliveira is trying to move laterally here, and then as long as she can stay out of bad positions in terms of getting locked up against the cage or from getting taken down, improvements that we've been seeing from her in terms of her takedown defense is just getting out of those bad positions up against the cage. If she can minimize that, she'll be able to land the more effective strikes, dig to the body, start slowing Maria Oliveira down, and then winning this fight by decision. It also helps that she'll have the home field advantage here, and hopefully the crowd pops a little bit more whenever she lands some significant strikes, and hopefully that plays into the decision. Give me Diana Belbita by decision. Moving over to the men's flyweight division, we got 20-5 David Dvorak welcoming 9-1 Steven Erceg to the UFC. Starting off on the David Dvorak side, he's riding a 2-fight losing streak right now at the hands of Matthias Nicolau and Manel Kape, the latter of which taking place in December of this past year. Dvorak was originally scheduled to fight Matt Schnell this June, but Schnell was forced to pull out of that fight, and Steve Erceg gets the call up here. Now David Dvorak tries to wipe away another short notice UFC debutant, exactly what he did to Juan Camilo Ronderos back in May of 2021. Dvorak is a solid all-around fighter with good striking, good combinations, and an underrated grappling game. Unfortunately, his last 2 fights have shown that he's likely not going to be able to surpass a certain level in the UFC, but he is likely a guy that will hover that top 10 to 15 range of the flyweight division. He's strong. He has great leg kicks as well, especially if he's able to implement them nice and early in his fights. But he's a great all-around fighter. He can go out there and implement a grapple-heavy game if he needs to, or he can just go out there and try to strike with his opponents looking to knock them out. I'm still a big fan of his, but we know that he's likely never going to crack that top 5 of the division, but he's a good litmus test for a lot of fighters coming into the UFC or looking to break into the top 10. He's looking to actually turn away a fighter that's coming in on short notice here. And Steve Erceg, who is the eternal MMA flyweight champion, who holds wins over guys like Shannon Ross and Sunguk Choi, who is actually on the current season of the Road to UFC. Steve Erceg is riding a 8-fight winning streak. He only has 1 loss through his 10 fights, and he's finished 6 of his 8 victories. He's very aggressive. He's a black belt in BJJ as of early 2022 and actually holds, I believe, a Muay Thai or kickboxing national championship down there in Australia. He's a solid all-around fighter, but the question remains is can he transfer that type of skill level to the UFC, considering some of the level of competition he's been fighting on the regional scene over there in Australia. He looks to have the goods, and I was kind of surprised that he wasn't the one getting the call up to the Contender Series back in 2022 when Shannon Ross actually got the shot, especially considering that Erceg has a win over Ross. But I was told that Erceg was having some visa issues, and now that he's fighting in Canada, I don't know if his issues down in the U.S. have been sorted or not, but at least he's getting the call up to the UFC, something that a lot of people believe he deserved for a while now, and I can't wait to see him go out there and showcase his talents on this level. I'm going to start off by saying Erceg is no slouch. Let's not overlook the kid here. He has a very stellar 9-1 record for a reason. He's very good pretty much everywhere, but I just need to know if he can handle the UFC level at this point. So I wouldn't be willing to take the heavy chalk on David Dvorak here. If anything, maybe a little bit of a sprinkle on the Erceg side, but I feel like that Dvorak is going to be a little bit too strong in the grappling situations, and I think he'll be able to land with a little bit more emphasis in terms of his striking. Add in his kicking game, I think he can slow down Erceg and put together a very good body of work for the judges to see it in his favor. But I think the odds are just a little bit too wide here. As of me recording this, he's roughly around minus 285. That line might start to drop as we get Erceg loves start to come in throughout the week. The only time I'd maybe consider a spot on Dvorak is if he somehow gets down to the minus 150, minus 160 range. Otherwise, I'm good with just a prediction on Dvorak for this fight to go over 2.5 rounds and for Dvorak to win by decision. Moving up to the featherweight division, we got 13-5-1 Kyle Nelson going up against 8-0-1 Blake Bilder. Starting off on the Kyle Nelson side, it seemed like he saved his job last time around by going to a draw with the Korean Superboy Doo-Ho Choi. That was due to an inadvertent headbutt in the 3rd round from Doo-Ho Choi, which got a point taken away from him, and 2 judges actually scored the 2nd round for Kyle Nelson, which ended up making that fight a majority draw. That is on the back end of 2 straight losses to the likes of Billy Q and Jay Herbert, fights in which Kyle Nelson has been looking to change up his fighting approach. What originally got him to the dance was his big striking power and knockout power, which allowed him to knock out a ton of opponents en route to getting that short notice call up to the UFC back in December of 2018. However, after coming up short against Diego Ferreira, Matt Sales, and then eventually getting his hand raised after a 96-second knockout over Polo Reyes, we saw Kyle Nelson try to change up his game plan to try to increase the longevity of his career in the UFC, but it's clear that his gas tank and his body is just not built for a grapple-heavy approach. When you just try to change up your style so quickly in your career, it's clear that your body's just not used to that. His body's used to going out there, stuffing takedowns, and putting power on his opponents with his striking. But it's clear that his level of striking is just not UFC level at this point, nor is his ability to improve his grappling game. He's going to have to extremely overhaul things if he wants to have success in that realm, but that's probably something he's not going to be able to implement in this fight against Blake Bilder. Blake Bilder is coming in as an undefeated fighter. He won his UFC debut back in February with a unanimous decision victory over Shane Young. That was a fight where he utilized his grappling in the first round and then a lot of good movement and striking in the second and third rounds to get his hand raised via decision. That actually was on the back end of his Contender Series winning effort as a plus 180 underdog to Canadian Alex Morgan, where he ended up dropping him and then finishing him with a rear naked choke 3 minutes into the first round of their fight. Blake Bilder is the former CFFC featherweight champion, and before he got an opportunity to he did defend it once. Before he had the opportunity to defend it twice, he got called up to the Contender Series and he was able to punch his ticket to the UFC with that emphatic performance. He's a great all-around fighter, but I believe he does his best work when he's able to get his opponents to the ground. His striking still needs a lot of improvement, but the fact that he added a lot of movement to his game made it very hard for Shane Young to get a beat on him to get his own offense off. If Bilder hopes to continue his success at this level, utilizing that type of footwork and lateral movement and then chaining wrestling behind it, or even a combination or two, will allow him to extend his UFC career, and I think he could do that with another win this weekend over Kyle Nelson. I feel like this is the perfect fight for Blake Bilder to go out there and get another UFC win, and it will come at the expense of a fellow Canadian, but I think Kyle Nelson really only has a puncher's stance to win this fight. I highly doubt he's going to try to go out there and implement a grapple-heavy game just as he has in the past, because Bilder is clearly the better grappler here. So if Kyle Nelson can try to exploit his striking advantage and the power that he has, he might be able to find some success. However, I love the movement, lateral movement, and just overall work we've been seeing from Bilder throughout the progression of his career, and I think that's going to cause Nelson some trouble in terms of landing a big shot. I think he might end up overextending on his shot here in terms of his striking. That will allow Bilder to change levels, get below that big strike, get this fight to the ground, and do good enough damage from on top, eventually finding a late finish here. So I like Bilder. I think he has a solid trajectory that he's on right now, and I think stylistically speaking, this is a horrible matchup for Kyle Nelson. Give me Blake Bilder probably by third round submission. Moving down a division and going to the bantamweights, we got 9-2 Amin Zahabi going up against 24-9 Aoriqileng. Starting off on the Canadian side here, in Amin Zahabi, he's coming off 2 straight victories over Draco Rodriguez and Ricky Tercios, which was last year in July. Amin Zahabi in that fight waded through the 11% striking accuracy of Ricky Tercios, who threw over 230 significant strikes that night, again, only landing 11% of them, and he landed over 50% of his own offense there, and Zahabi was able to get his hand raised by being more efficient with his damage and his striking. He comes originally from a striking background, but he has some sneaky submissions up his sleeve if he can get fights to the ground, but it's very discouraging to see the lack of activity throughout his UFC career. He got signed to the UFC at the beginning of 2017 and has only competed 5 times since then. He's put together a 3-2 record with losses to Ricardo Ramos and Vince Morales. He actually took off almost 2 years between the Morales and Draco Rodriguez fight, but now he finds himself in his 3rd fight during this COVID era. He's a striker with decent power, as he showcased in the Draco Rodriguez fight. And obviously, you got to believe that he has a lot of good fight IQ, considering he's the younger brother of famed Canadian head coach Firas Zahabi. Amin Zahabi, though, is 35 years old, and you got to wonder how much time he has left in his career. But you got to wonder that he probably doesn't think that he has a title run in him, especially being that old in this weight class. He has good striking prowess, good technical striking specifically, and he throws in combinations and is very patient in terms of letting his offense go. Again, very sneaky submission game as well, but we'll see if he even looks to take fights to the ground moving forward. In his or opposite of him this weekend is Aoriqileng, who's on a 2-fight winning streak of his own, specifically since moving up a division here to bantamweight. He finished Cameron Else back in April of 2022 and then picked up a decision victory over Jay Perron back in August. He spent a couple months over there at Fight Ready and then was forced to move back to China, but has been spending the last 2 or so weeks in Arizona at Fight Ready, getting ready for this fight, and he will have the famed striking coach from Fight Ready, Mr. Eddie Cha, in his corner. He's built a very good relationship with fellow, I believe, bantamweight or featherweight fighter Haile Alatang, who has a great wrestling background. So I believe that's the weakness in Aoriqileng's game, and if he can continue to improve the grappling or defensive grappling aspects of his game, he will be more than happy to go out there and continue to strike with his opponents, putting his big power and aggressive striking style to use. The Mongolian Murderer nickname is apt for a fighter like this, especially with the way that he fights. Even in losses like he had against Jeff Molina and Cody Durden, he is putting it all out there and really putting the pressure on his opponents. It seemed like the technical striking advantage of Jeff Molina was too much, as well as the grappling advantage of Cody Durden for Aoriqileng. But in the last couple of fights, we have been seeing grappling advantage or improvements from him. So that gives me hope that this 29-year-old fighter who has, 33 fights under his belt is still making improvements at this point in his career. And I think he still has a bright future ahead of him if he can put everything together. This should be a fun striking battle for as long as it lasts. And, I do think it goes the full 15 minutes, but there could be some finishing opportunities for both guys here, considering how much I expect this to play out in the striking realm. If anything, I think Zahabi might look to take this to the ground and try to utilize his jiu-jitsu. However, I think we are seeing solid defensive grappling improvements from Aoriqileng, especially since moving up to this bantamweight division, that I think he'll be able to keep this in the striking realm and that he'll likely be able to come out on top, given his output advantage, his volume advantage, and just landing more significant strikes on Zahabi. Zahabi's a little bit too timid at times in terms of throwing his offense, and it obviously paid off for him against Ricky Tercios. However, I don't think that Aoriqileng is only going to land 11% of his significant strikes, as he is a little bit more methodical and a little bit more accurate with his striking than Ricky Tercios was last time around. So give me Aoriqileng here, and I think he wins this fight by decision. Next, we move to the women's flyweight division, where we have 11-4 Miranda Maverick going up against 8-2 Jasmine Jasudavicius. Starting off on the Miranda Maverick side, she's coming off 2 straight wins now over Sabina Mazo, who she finished in the second round with a rear naked choke, and most recently in November defeating Shanna Young once again via decision. Miranda Maverick is a fighter that continues to show improvements at her young age of 25 years old. Training under the tutelage of the Elevation Fight team, you know that she has a bright future still ahead of her, but you gotta wonder when her physical advantages will start to catch up with at least her skill level will catch up to the physical advantages she normally brings to the table. We saw her lose 2 straight fights to Macy Barber and Erin Blanchfield in 2021. Although the former in those 2 fights, we know that it was a pretty bad decision that she ended up losing. But the Erin Blanchfield fight was one that we saw her get taken down 7 times and controlled for over 12 minutes of a 15-minute fight. It seems as though that she does have issues, or has even shown issues in the past, even before coming to the UFC, against fighters that try to put on a grapple-heavy approach. If opponents just look to straight up strike with her, they'll more than likely end up coming on the losing end because of Maverick's ability to get fights to the ground and utilize her strength from that top position. She's a solid jiu-jitsu player as well, who showcases great strength when she's able to get her opponents to the mat, but I still have question marks about her technical abilities in terms of getting fights to the mat, and even her striking as well, which seems to need some work at this point. However, she is still a very bright prospect that we need to keep our eyes on, and I'm not writing her off by any means, but I think we need to kind of tone down the over-exaggeration of hype that we seem to have on her time and time again. On the flip side, for Jasmine Jasudavicius, who comes in with an 8-2 record, she bounced back successfully after her first UFC loss at the hands of Natalia Silva last year. She defeated Gabriela Fernandez back in February by decision. That was a fight where she went back to her wrestling roots and was able to get the fight to the ground effectively and do damage from on top, whether it was getting the crucifix position and landing big elbows from on top, or even consistently passing that guard and getting good enough damage from on top that the referee was not forced to step in to stand up the fight at all. Jasmine, that is her game. She comes out of a team called Niagara Top Team, which is mainly known for its wrestling. And I get it. Canada is not really known for wrestling, but there are specific sects within the country that are very good at that. And Niagara Top Team is showcasing why a lot of their top prospects can go out there and just grind their opponents through the mat. Jasudavicius is one of the first coming out of that camp that is making noise on the UFC scene. And I know there's going to be a ton of other guys on the come up. They just need a little bit more experience and a little bit more exposure, and they'll be able to make that change. It seemed as though in this fight against Gabriela Fernandez tried to do what Natalia Silva did. A lot of lateral movement, staying on the outside and trying to pick apart Jasudavicius. But Jasudavicius did a great thing in terms of cutting off the cage, landing strikes of her own rather than just trying to go for desperation takedowns. And that allowed the takedowns to come effortlessly behind that. It was a great improvement and adjustment that she made, and something that she learned harshly from the Natalia Silva fight. And I look forward to seeing how she's able to implement that moving forward so that she can use her advantages to the best of her abilities and still come out on the winning end. This is really a tough one because, I'm big on Maverick. I think she has a tremendous amount of potential, and I think she has a very bright future. But stylistically speaking, this is one of the harder matchups that she has over her last several fights. The opponents that she's beating without too much issue are the ones that she can just go out there, outstrike, or even utilize her grappling and just take them to the ground. The ones she's losing to are the ones that she's giving up takedowns to and really can't do much when they get her to the ground. Obviously, Erin Blanchfield far superior than Jasmine Jasudavicius, don't get me wrong, but Jasudavicius is one of the better grapplers that the flyweight division has to showcase. She, like I said, she trains out of one of the better wrestling teams that we have in Canada, and I think she can implement her size advantage, which she's going to have a large size advantage in this matchup, and she can use that strength against Maverick here to get her to the ground and do some good damage from on top. My only concern is Maverick's jiu-jitsu off of her back or her ability to possibly reverse positions here, but it's going to be on Jasudavicius to drain her gas tank, keep that forward pressure on her, and just keep that grappling pressure on her to potentially eke this fight out. I think it's much closer than the odds actually indicate here, and I get it. My Canada is probably showing here, but I feel like we've seen these upsets happen in women's MMA fights where the big favorite is assumed to go in there and just do the damn thing, just as Jasudavicius was supposed to do against Natalia Silva. But given the stylistic matchup, it could actually prove different for Miranda Maverick here. So give me Jasudavicius. I think she wins this fight by decision. Low confidence. Again, this is I believe it's a tighter fight than the odds indicate, which is why I'm willing to take a shot on Jasudavicius here. But, I think she has the chops to go out there and pull off the upset. So give me Jasudavicius by decision. Headlining the prelim portion of the card, we got a middleweight bout between Nasruddin Imavov, who comes in with a 12-4 record, going up against 30-10 Chris Action Man Curtis. Starting off on the Frenchman side here in Imavov, he's coming off a loss in his first UFC main event slot back in January against short notice replacement Sean Strickland. I believe Kelvin Gastelum had to pull out of that fight on fight week, and Sean Strickland, who was fresh off his own main event matchup at the last event of 2022, was more than happy to step in after he felt he got robbed against Jared Cannonier, and he was able to flip the script and pick up his own decision victory over Imavov. Strickland showcased forward pressure, great cardio, and the ability to just wane through that sniping style of Imavov and get off his own offense. And he even landed a couple takedowns to boot as well. Imavov is a solid striker. His nickname, the Russian Sniper, is apt for him, especially considering how he likes to strike. He stays on the outside, utilizes his kicks up the middle, and his long straight shots down the pipe to keep his opponents at distance. He's normally at a decent height advantage, standing at 6'3" for this middleweight division, and he's been able to use it against guys like Joaquin Buckley, Edmund Shabazian, and even Ian Heinisch, finishing the former two out of those three opponents. Now he holds a 4-2 record since entering the UFC back in 2020, and I believe he has a solid matchup for him this weekend against a name opponent and actually the training partner of his last opponent, Sean Strickland. Chris Curtis comes into this matchup on a 2-2 run over his last 4 fights, most recently dropping a unanimous decision to Kelvin Gastelum back in April at UFC 287. That was a back-and-forth fight, which I believe Kelvin Gastelum ended up winning the first 2 rounds, if I'm not mistaken, and then ended up dropping the third there to Curtis. Again, back-and-forth fight. Gaslam had some moments. Chris Curtis had some moments. But we know what Chris is good at. He likes to go in there, throw down in the pocket with his opponent, and try to find that knockout. Joaquin Buckley was doing a decent enough job in the first 6 or 7 minutes of that fight before he got dragged into a pocket exchange with Curtis and ended up paying for it and getting dropped and finished. Curtis is normally a 170-pounder, but since joining the UFC back in 2021, he managed to find success with getting 3 straight victories at middleweight and seemingly is now comfortable with fighting at 185 pounds, even though he'll likely be at a size disadvantage throughout his career. I believe he's going to have to take a couple straight losses in the UFC at this weight class to realize that, you know what, I probably need to go down to welterweight if I hope to be successful at this level. And I believe this weekend will be another reminder for him that maybe his size is just, going to be the big disadvantage that he'll not be able to overcome as he continues to take steps up this middleweight ladder. This could be a fun fight for sure. Obviously, you got Imavov's distance striking compared to the pocket exchanges and big, combination striking style of Chris Curtis. But I feel like this is a fight that Imavov should be able to keep at distance, keep Curtis on the end of his punches, and win this fight by decision. But there are inevitably going to be spots where Curtis can suck Imavov into a pocket exchange, and he might be able to get off enough damage in those spots that he could get the judge's favor or even find a knockout in those spots. So I have low confidence on the Imavov side here, but I feel as though he is just more equipped to win this stylistic matchup. Not to mention the size disadvantage that Chris Curtis will be in this fight. I believe it's a 5-inch height advantage, and I believe their reach is the same at 75 inches, but I think it's really the kicking game of Imavov that's going to frustrate Chris Curtis here, keep him on the outside, and keep him away from really getting off his own effective offense. Give me the Russian Frenchman, Nasruddin Imavov, to win this fight by decision. Kicking off the main card in the middleweight division, we got 15-6 Marc-Andre Barriault going up against 15-7 Eryk Anders. Marc-Andre Barriault has split his last 4 fights as he's gone 2-2, losing a fight to Chidi Njokuani, picking up a win over Jordan Wright, losing a fight to Anthony Hernandez, and then most recently picking up a patented win over Julian Marquez. And what I mean by that is it was a classic Barriault performance. He fights similarly to Anthony Hernandez, who was his former foe as well, but slightly differently in the fact that Hernandez goes out there and tries to grapple his opponents into the mat, utilize high cardio, high activity, and high grappling to wear out his opponents so that he can finish them late, which is what he did to Andre Barriault. And then on the flip side for Marc-Andre, he uses his pressure footwork style, combination striking, and just pushing the pace by staying in his opponent's face and just wearing them out that way. Even though he ended up losing that first round to Julian Marquez, he made Marquez work a lot in that matchup, and it showcased that if Barriault's durability can hold up, he is a very difficult opponent to get out of there and deal with and even try to survive a full 15 minutes with. I think my claim to fame in terms of calling round 3 props was due to the Abu Azaitar fight for Barriault, who managed to work him into the mat and then eventually get a TKO with 4 seconds left on the clock, as I knew that he would have a significant cardio advantage in that fight. Not only that fight, but other fights against power punchers have showcased that Barriault does have a decent enough durability, so that doesn't make me question him too much going up against guys like Julian Marquez or even other power punchers that he might face moving forward. I remember seeing him on the amateur scene back in Montreal way back in the day, and I believe that moving down to South Florida was a great move for him, especially with the type of training and training partners he's getting over there at Killcliff FC. I expect to see Marc-Andre really start to tie things together now and get a streak going if he can continue showcasing the improvements that he's making down there at Killcliff FC. He's a very solid all-around fighter, but it's really his ability to weaponize his cardio and that forward pressure that breaks his opponent that sees him shine. On the flip side for Eryk Anders, he's had a rough go of things over the last couple of fights. He is also 2-2, but he had a 2-fight losing streak sprinkled in there. He got armbarred by Andre Nunes back in December of 2021, lost a controversial decision last year to Jun-Young Park. It was a close fight, I should call it that, but then managed to get his dub back here against Kyle Dawkins back in December, where he just absolutely obliterated him from jump. He was a big underdog in that matchup, but Dawkins showcased that it's very difficult for him to take damage anymore, especially since he got knocked out by Roman Dolidze a couple months prior. Eryk Anders, decent punching power. He hadn't really shown it much, over the last couple of years up until that Kyle Dawkins fight. He more so has been showing that he can go out there and just utilize his physical advantages over his opponents and defeat them that way. He needs to continue showcasing his skills and improvements in the rest of his skills if he hopes to be successful at this level. He's 36 years old now, or at least turned 36 back in April, and I believe the work that he's been doing with Fight Ready has him in tip-top shape. I believe he made that move in 2020 because he looked damn good against Darren Stewart in their first fight, and then in the second fight, he just chose to opt for a bunch of control time up against the cage to grind that fight out and get that victory. Again, physical advantages are great to beat the lower end of the UFC roster, but as you continue to take steps up in competition and rankings, you're going to have to bring in the talent side of it as well. I think this is a great fight for Marc-Andre Barriault. Going back to watching Eric Anders' fight with fellow Canadian and the late great Elias Theodorou, I think if we see Barriault take sex of that game plan, or even just take sex of the game plan where we've seen Anders get outworked, that's how Barriault wins this fight. Just do the patented Barriault thing. As long as his durability holds up here, I just don't see how Eric Anders gets his hand raised. Barriault is going to be the more effective striker here, especially down the stretch. He's going to be more active, throw more output, and just bring more to the table than just pushing somebody up against the cage. Of course, Anders could potentially land a big bomb and put Barriault down, but I think Barriault's durability issues are being a little bit over-exaggerated. Of course, it's going to happen once in a while in a fighter's career, but I think that Barriault will show off a good enough durability, good enough pressure game, keeping Anders on the back foot, which won't allow him to produce enough power to find that knockout shot against Barriault. So give me Barriault, similar to what he did against Julian Marquez, maybe possible late finish for Barriault here. At worst, I think he wins this fight by decision. If you can get one of those spots that gives you round 3/decision, I'd take that shot as well. Give me Barriault, and I feel pretty good about it as well. Moving over to the featherweight division, we got 16-6 Dan Ige going up against 17-7 Nate Landwehr. Starting off on the Dan Ige side, he snapped a 3-fight losing streak by knocking out Damon Jackson back in January. That was a beautiful fight that showcased that Dan Ige still has it. I know a lot of people were counting him out going into that Damon Jackson fight, but you got to give him the benefit of the doubt considering that his 3-fight losing streak him against the Korean Zombie, Josh Emmett, and Movsar Evloev, all guys who have either fought for the title or are primed to eventually fight for the title, especially Movsar Evloev. Dan Ige is a BJJ black belt, but he utilizes tight boxing combinations and good defensive striking to put the pressure on his opponents and utilize his power and deceiving power, I should say, to really hurt his opponents in the pocket or at least damage them enough to make it look good enough for the judges and get his hand raised. He has an underrated grappling game, but is a BJJ black belt, and you see that on full display when he's able to get fights to the ground and do good enough damage from that top pressure. I don't know if he'll ever be a guy that cracks that top 5 or even tries to get close to a title shot, even though he's only 31 years old. And I think he's shown his ceiling, especially during that 3-fight losing streak he's on. But he is a very tough test for anybody looking to break into that top 10. And that's exactly what he's going to be getting this weekend in a guy in Nate Landwehr who's trying to burst that top 10 ranking as well. Skipping over to the Nate Landwehr side, he's on a 3-fight winning streak. 2 of those being big upset victories, coming in as near 2-1 underdogs in both fights against Ludovic Klein and David Onama. He started off his UFC career 1-2, getting knocked out brutally in both of his losses, and he had a lot of hype coming into the UFC, but that quickly fizzled out during that 1-2 run that started his UFC career. But with 3 straight victories now and a budding personality that a lot of people are enjoying, Nate Landwehr is on the cusp of bursting into being a star in the UFC if he can continue to get his hand raised. But I still question his level of durability at this level, especially against guys who are going to be able to hit him and hit him cleanly in the pocket, counter him effectively, especially with some of the wild strikes that he likes to bring to the table. He has a good grappling background as well and has pulled off some sneaky chokes as we've seen over the last couple fights, but I still question his just wildness and, just his aggressiveness is a little bit too sporadic and too wild for my liking to be competing against the top of the division. But he's a treat to watch. He is a fan favorite for sure, and I know the fan in me is definitely cheering for him to get his hand raised this weekend. Let's just see if he can continue to keep the train rolling through Vancouver, British Columbia. I think that this is a step up for Nate Landwehr in the UFC scene that he's just not fully equipped for. Dan Ige is a guy that can be beaten, don't get me wrong, but I think his slick and tight boxing style is going to be a little bit too tough for Landwehr to get a beat on. I think Landwehr is going to continuously crash the pocket here, try to get off some big offense, but that's going to open up opportunities for Ige to counter effectively, land some big shots, and possibly even end Landwehr's night with the big knockout. I don't think the odds should be super wide in this fight, don't get me wrong, but Landwehr is a fun fighter. The fan in me is going to be hoping he pulls off the victory here, but I think he's going to struggle with a more well-rounded Dan Ige. But if he can put together output, stay away from the big punching power of Ige, maybe even land some takedowns and make it look good for the judges, Landwehr is live in this fight. But I still lean on the veteran, Dan Ige. I think he has a better overall game. I think he lands the better significant strikes, and I think he eventually finds a knockout in this fight. Give me Dan Ige by knockout. Round 2? I don't know what round, but I think by knockout. Moving up to the welterweight division, we have proper Mike Malott coming in with a 9-1-1 record, going up against 9-3 Adam Fugitt. Starting off on the Mike Malott side, he's riding a solid winning streak right now since receiving his first loss to Hakeem Dawodu way back in 2014. He, after that fight, had a lot of difficulties in terms of building up the courage and motivation to step inside the cage, which is when he actually saw himself move down from Canada to Sacramento to start training with the Team Alpha Male guys and really started to find himself in a coaching position with the team there. From that span of like 2017 through 2020, you can really see him as a prominent cornerman whenever the Team Alpha Male guys went out there to compete. However, through that time, he found that fire once again and put together a 1-2-3-1 streak, including his Contender Series winning performance, which was only a 39-second guillotine choke over Szymon Smotritsky, and that earned him his contract to the UFC and the fire to go out there and achieve the potential that a lot of people expected from him way back in 2014. I remember being a part of the planning committee, or at least being the logistics manager for SCC2, which was the night that he fought Alan Wilson. We couldn't find anybody to fight him. On Tapology, there's only one guy listed that was canceled in terms of fighting him. But trust me, there were so many guys out there that turned down to fight Mike Malott because of how highly touted of a prospect he was. But he eventually ran into Hakeem Dawodu, and then people were more than willing to end up fighting him. But now at the UFC level, nobody is going to be able to turn him down, considering he's fighting at the highest level. He comes in with a very smooth and solid striking background, coming from a Muay Thai base originally, but has been improving his jiu-jitsu game throughout the years, which showcases as he's been able to pull off a lot of submissions throughout his career as well. I'm surprised that he used to fight at 145 pounds way back in the day, given his frame standing at 6'1", but now he's fully filled out into a welterweight body, and I think that this is the best division for him to compete at. His opponent this weekend, Adam Fugitt, like I said, comes in with a 9-3 record and currently has a 1-1 record through his first 2 UFC fights. I've been a little bit higher on him than most, especially since his short notice UFC debut against Michael Morales back in July, and he came up short in that fight, but he did actually win the first round on at least 2 judges' scorecards. It seemed like the short notice aspect of that fight did play into it as his gas tank started to run on empty, and he eventually got finished in that final round. He pulled off a big upset in his next bout against Yusaku Kinoshita, which took place back in February, and I think that kind of reminded people that Fugitt is, he's a solid fighter. He came into the UFC with an 8-2 record. He is not somebody to just overlook. He has good pace, good wrestling, good striking, and some decent power as well. I think with the full training camp, he's a very tough cookie to beat, and or at least, very difficult opponent to match up against. But I think he is definitely getting up there in age at 34 years old. He's probably right in his prime, but I just believe that there is a solid cap on his career at this point in time. Just somebody that not a lot of people should be overlooking. I feel I should be more confident on the Mike Malott side, just given what I know about him, given I know what kind of potential he has, and I feel like the public is still a little bit lower on him just because of they don't know him the way that I used to know him in terms of how highly touted he was way back in the day. And it seems like he's really stringing things together right now. I feel as though he should win this fight, but Adam Fugitt is another guy that the public is generally very low on. I feel like he could potentially find a big shot here to put Mike Malott down and get his own hand raised. So I'm not big on taking the heavy chalk here on Mike Malott, but what I would take the chalk on is the violence. Under 2.5, last time I checked, was like minus 230. I think that's fine. I think both guys have finishing upside here, but I'm going to lean with the Malott side here, who eventually finds this takedown, finds a submission, and wraps it up and takes it on home with him. But this is going to be a very violent fight, especially the way that these guys match up here. When Malott gets fights to the ground, he's very aggressive, looking for finishes. And when both of these guys are on the feet, they go out there looking for finishes. I think it's going to be Mike Malott who ends up getting that hand raised by finish. I'm going to call it submission. Give me Mike Malott. Oh boy. We got a high-stakes lightweight matchup here in the co-main event between 33-9 former lightweight champion Charles "Do Bronx" Oliveira going up against 22-4-1 Beneil Dariush. Starting off on the Charles Oliveira side, he is fresh off of losing his title actually back in October against Islam Makhachev, a fight that probably was not the best for him stylistically speaking. However, let's take a moment and just tip our caps to the revolutionary, well, not revolutionary, but like the evolution in Charles Do Bronx Oliveira's game since 2018. I believe the record that he had, let me just quickly get the number here for you guys. It was 19 and, where is it? Through his first 19 fights with the promotion, he was 10-8 and won no contest. But after his loss to Paul Felder back in December of 2017, he went on an 11-fight winning streak, which saw him capture the lightweight title and defend it once before it eventually got stripped from him from missing weight against, I believe it was Dustin Poirier. Was it Dustin Poirier? There was one fight where he ended up getting it stripped. Oh yeah, it was the Justin Gaethje fight that he got it stripped from him, but he still ended up winning that fight and then ended up challenging for the title once again against Islam Makhachev. Do Bronx has made vast improvements in terms of his technical striking. His wrestling is up there as well, and the ability to not quit on himself. He's, shown in the past that if things aren't going his way early, he'll look for a way out and usually give up. But there were some fights where he faced adversity through that 11-fight winning streak, the Michael Chandler fight, even the Dustin Poirier fight, but he managed to keep it together and still go out there and get his hand raised. Now he has another big test ahead of him this weekend, and Beneil Dariush, who's also on a big winning streak of his own. I believe he's on a 10-fight winning streak. Let me just confirm that number: 8-fight winning streak, and he's been turning away all comers, and in emphatic fashion as well. He came into his last fight against Mateusz Gamrot the same night that Charles Oliveira lost his belt. He came in as nearly a +2 underdog against Gamrot and was able to go out there, stuff the grapple-heavy approach of Gamrot, and beat him to the punch in the striking realm. Beneil came into the UFC as a BJJ black belt, but under the tutelage of Rafael Cordero over there at MMA Kings, has really rounded out his striking game and is really putting it to use, beating up most of his opponents and even finishing them with some big strikes on the feet. His defensive grappling is top-notch, never settling for a bad position, and he's always putting the pressure on his opponents, looking to either get them out of there or at least control them long enough to get his hand raised at the end of the fight by decision. He cannot be denied a title shot if he manages to defeat Charles Oliveira, especially if he does it in emphatic fashion. But I know for damn sure, considering the amount of fights that Charles Oliveira has been in and the amount of his fights that have gone to a decision, this fight is promised to be a barn burner. This is another fight that has violence written all over it. Unless it's one of those fights where either guy look to try to dominate each other in the grappling realm by holding them down. I just don't see that happening though. Both guys very rarely settle for position, and if it's Charles Oliveira on his back, he's a guy that's likely given up on himself unless he's throwing up submissions off of his back. The under 2.5 is my favorite spot in this matchup. I believe it's going to be Beneil Dariush eventually finding a big knockout here over Charles Do Bronx, whether it's a club and sub or just a club and drum opportunity. But given that it's 27 out of 31 UFC fights for Charles Oliveira that have finished inside the distance, yes, the under 2.5 at -165, give me some of that. I feel like we're going to see violence here, but I think it's going to be Beneil Dariush getting his hand raised. Time for the main event of the evening, and it goes down in the women's bantamweight division as the 22-5 Amanda Nunes looks to defend her bantamweight title once again against 14-6 Irene Aldana. Starting off on the Amanda Nunes side, she is coming off of getting her title back from Juliana Pena after unfortunately losing it back in December of 2021. I think this is a perfect example of what it looks like when a fighter goes in unmotivated and completely disrespecting her opponent and then losing and then changing the tide, taking the fight seriously and showcasing what it would have looked like if she took the fight seriously. And that's exactly what happened in the second matchup. In the first fight, we saw Amanda Nunes go out there and show reckless abandon. She wasn't caring what Juliana Pena was throwing her way, really believing that she could go out there and just knock out Juliana Pena just as she's been able to do to previous opponents. But Pena was showcasing good durability that night, took on all the heat that Amanda Nunes brought on early, and then eventually took her to the mat and made her tap to a rear naked choke that wasn't really even that deep. And I believe it really came down to Nunes thinking that she can go out there and knock out Pena relatively easily. Like, considering, when you have Joe Rogan stroking you off every single week or every time that you're fighting, saying you're the best woman to ever do it, you have crazy knockout power, nobody could stand up to you, you start drinking your own juice. And I think that's what ended up happening with Amanda Nunes, which is why she ended up overlooking Juliana Pena and losing that fight. But we saw her come back about 7 months later, and showcasing way more determination, way more motivation. And she went out there and absolutely battered Juliana Pena over 25 minutes. That allowed her to reclaim her title. And now she was actually scheduled to fight Juliana Pena again. But Pena pulls out to an injury, and in steps Irene Aldana, who is a very stiff competitor as well. But Nunes training out of her own camp there in Florida now after spending the majority of her career at American Top Team. It seems like she is starting to wind down her career at 35 years old, but I still think she has a couple dominant performances left on her record, or at least left to be had. Her opponent this weekend is Mexican Irene Aldana, who's riding a 2-fight winning streak. In both fights, she managed to knock her opponents out. The first of which to Yana Santos, so she landed a beautiful punch from the top and then eventually landed some ground and pound to get her out of there. And then the second fight was the Macy Chiasson fight, which was 1-1 going into that third round. And it seemed like it was a round that was going to be in Macy Chiasson's favor until Irene Aldana pulled off something we've never seen before. And that was an upkick to the liver that immediately crumbled Macy Chiasson and got Irene Aldana's hand raised. Aldana, at her best, utilizes her boxing and combinations from outside, where she's able to batter her opponents, either knock them out or win a decision just off of volume. Her defensive grappling is really, it seems, where she needs to make her improvement still, as that's where past opponents have been able to beat her, most recently, Holly Holm back in October of 2020. She is kind of active off of her back, but dealing with the higher level of the UFC bantamweight division, it's going to be hard for her to fight off her back, just as we saw in her fight against Macy Chiasson, where she seemed to have trouble in that fight fighting defensively in the grappling realm. But in the striking realm, she is no chump, and I think she might even have a slight technical striking advantage over Nunes this weekend. But the question is if she can keep it in that realm long enough to exploit that advantage that I believe that she has by a smidge. It's not a whole lot, but if she is to win this fight, it will likely have to come in the striking realm. Last time I checked, the over 2.5 is currently sitting around even money. And I think that the way that Nunes is going to look to attack this fight will be with takedowns. And I think that we're going to see a lot of stalling here throughout the fight and a lot of back and forth, which will cause this fight to go over that 12.5 minute mark, probably even go into the 4th or 5th round. I do like the Nunes side here because she is a little bit more well-equipped for this type of matchup. She has the grappling advantage, she can get the takedowns with relative ease, and she can do great work from on top. And I think that Irene Aldana, she's good enough off of her back to stay safe in terms of not getting finished, but I think that she's going to struggle in terms of working back to her feet or finding a submission off her back to catch something with, to catch Nunes in. So I'm still going to go with the champion here. Minus 325, sure. The money line might be a tad wide, but I feel like it's accurate. I think she has all the advantages here. The only way Aldana wins this fight, in my opinion, is if she ends up finding a knockout on the feet. But I think that Nunes is going to cross the pocket over and over again, get this fight to the ground, and then just do work from on top. Seeing this fight go over that 2.5 round mark, and I might even ladder it. Over 2.5, over 3.5, over 4.5, fight goes to decision. Give me Nunes by decision and still. And there you guys go. Breakdowns on all 11 fights on the card. Appreciate all the love and support as always. Remember, PFL breakdowns are going to be on the Patreon. Link in the description below. And also, if you want to do your own research for all of the PFL or upcoming regional events that we have throughout June, you can find all of that good stuff on the MMA Fight Archive to make all your studying oh so easy. So you have a little bit of extra time to go spend with your loved ones and just do whatever the hell you like instead of just spending all endless hours of the day looking for footage from all corners of the world. I got you covered. I'm the best in the world at doing this thing, which is why professionals all over the space rely on your boy to provide them with footage, with links, with all that stuff. I know where to find it all, and I have it all posted for you guys on the MMA Fight Archive, link in the description below. Appreciate every single one of you guys. I'll be back later this week for the Locky two-step, formerly the Locky Trinity. We're going to be changing it to a 2-leg free parlay just so we can get some dubs under our belt. Don't worry, I will add a bonus segment in there to complete the Locky Trinity so we can keep that going as well. But the main focus will be the Locky two-step, which is a free 2-leg parlay, and then the 3 best prop bets, which will drop on Fridays as well. I tried doing Friday, Saturday drops, not working out the way that I thought it would, so we're going to go back to the regular Thursday, Friday drop. All right, appreciate all the love and support as always. Hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Good luck on all your action this weekend, and I'll see you guys later on this week. Peace.
Last thing.